About the state of the economy with us, Vice President of Vision for Fund Distributors, Heather Zumaraga, and Policy Director at America First Policies, Curtis Ellis. Heather, Curtis, great to see you both.
Great to be here. Thanks.
All right, Heather, we keep talking about these unemployment numbers and new unemployment claims over the last 4 weeks. We can put them up on the screen. I guess the good news is they've gone down every week, relatively speaking. But are we seeing the new job losses starting to wind down?
Yeah, well, it is a declining trend, so perhaps we peaked at around 6 million weekly job losses 2 weeks ago, 5 last week, 4 this week. It's still a very horrific number, so I don't want to minimize 4 million people this week losing their job, but it does appear to be like a downtrend, and the Paycheck Protection Program seems to be working in terms of the efficacy of getting people back to work or keeping them employed, because the continuing claims are at about 16 million right now. That number is very, very high, of course, but that's a lot more important than the overall amount of job losses, because it says whether people are putting people back on the payroll or if people are staying unemployed. And that number, the continuing claims data, will be very important when we reopen the economy as well, to see if people get their jobs back if they've been furloughed.
Yeah, a date we are all looking forward to and anticipating greatly. Curtis, state and local governments are warning now of a wave of layoffs. We've seen the private sector layoffs. Now we're talking about more public sector layoffs unless they get a bigger coronavirus relief package. In many places, those painful reductions are already starting to take shape. New York Mayor Bill de Blasio proposed a $2 billion budget cut starting July 4th. Detroit has proposed laying off 200 workers and furloughing thousands more. Ohio's Hamilton County Commissioner is talking about a 10% pay cut for county workers there. Los Angeles is planning to force city workers to spend 26 days on unpaid leave. This is going to have an even deeper impact on the economy, is it not?
Yes, it certainly will. It's interesting not to make politics out of this, but up till now, most of the people who've been affected by the small business closures and by the being declared non-essential have been people who have traditionally been in the Republican base of support. Small businesses are traditionally Republican. When we start seeing government workers laid off, these are traditionally Democrat voters. So maybe some of these governors and maybe people like Nancy Pelosi will be more sensitive to the needs of people who are not working. It's very condescending for Andrew Cuomo, Governor Cuomo, to be talking about, oh yeah, I know everybody has cabin fever and wants to get out. No, people want to make a living. They want to pay their rent. They want to buy clothes for their kids. They want their kids to get an education, because you can't just put learning to read on hold and come back in 6 months and pick up where you left off. That's not the way maturation and developing brains operate.
Yeah.
So maybe when we see some of these typical Democratic voters facing and feeling some of the hardship, maybe there'll be a little more sympathy on the part of these governors.
Yeah, when they say all politics is local, that's really what they mean. Where does your support come from, that local base of support, whether it's geographical or otherwise? But you're talking about these public sector employees, Curtis, and you're right, they're going to start feeling the pinch of this right now. Heather, when we talk about the prospect of, like Bill de Blasio saying that his city needs a bailout, if that money doesn't come, what happens next?
Well, I think New York is its own special case, right, which is very different from Georgia, for example, where the governor is looking at reopening, even though he's received some pushback and backlash from the president and others about reopening the economy. But I think it's very important to get this money. The House is looking at another 400 plus billion to put back in small businesses' hands today to pass that bill. It's important to get it in the right people's hands. So you look at Harvard Endowment, for example, Potbellies, or Ruth Chris. Those are not the type of businesses that need this type of money. And to be fair to them, they have some of those companies like Potbellies and Harvard are giving that money back. But we want it to get into the hands of people that have put their entire life savings into their business to keep people employed. And I think that is what the that is what the program is doing. And it is going to boil down at the end of the efficacy of these type of stimulus programs and how well they work. And I think they're working as best as they can, given the extraordinary record timing that they had to be passed.
No, that's a fair point, and we have been critical of some of these things, like you talked about, the money for these endowments. I mean, Harvard is basically a hedge fund as it is, and it's kind of ridiculous for them to be getting this money the way they operate with their endowment. But Curtis, we're also talking about basic human nature, as you mentioned, the desire for people to get back to work, the need for them to get back to work. And when you see the way that government kind of approaches Michigan, for example. A lot of people seem to turn their nose up and seem to discredit these protesters and what their motives are.
Yes, many of the people who are today called non-essential 2 years ago were dismissed as deplorables.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very it's sad that the governors like Governor Whitmer, who's appearing in the role of Nurse Ratched, I'm going to do this, it's for your own good, so please just swallow the medicine and shut up. It's a disconnect between how people live. People want to work. Kids want to be in touch with their friends. Human nature is such that we need to be engaged with each other. In the old days, we would decide which businesses were non-essential. We would stop shopping there and they would go out of business.
Right.
Government always seems to have a way to justify grabbing more power, and we have to be very suspicious of that.
And Heather, we've also talked about things like, earlier this week I talked about a bond that Carnival Cruise Line put out. They needed to raise $4 billion of emergency funding to keep them in business. And they actually had $17 billion of demand for that $4 billion bond. Also, we talked about oil prices. A lot of headlines this week about oil prices going negative. But now you look at oil futures, they're back up down the road. So there are signs that point to this being a temporary blip on the radar, as deep as it is. But it's not that there's fundamental problems with the economy before this started, right?
No, there really isn't. That's a good point. Bond issuance is up. When you look at corporate bonds on Wall Street, that's a big indicator of demand and that the markets are functioning well as opposed to a few weeks ago. The stock market is actually up today despite the horrific unemployment data of another 4 million people losing their jobs, and that's because the market is forward-looking. So if we think the economy is going to reopen in 4 to 6 weeks, you're seeing oil head higher, even though it's still at very low levels. We saw it drop below zero for the first time ever. Those are the things that you want to see, and the market typically bottoms, though, before the economy. That's what happened in 2008. Before the peak of unemployment claims, the market actually bottomed. So I don't want to say that a bottom has been put in, but I do think those are very encouraging signs.
And a reminder that the sun will come out tomorrow. Heather, great to see you, Curtis. Great to see you as well. Take care.